Today we're going to learn about ancient Greece. We have 3 daily objectives. Number 1, we're going to explain how geography influenced the creation of city-states in Greece. Number 2, we're going to compare ancient Sparta and Athens. And number 3, we're going to define the Delian League. So we're going to actually start off with some pictures of me in Greece. So this is me on the island of Crete. This is an ancient city called Knossos. Knossos was like the biggest city in ancient Greece up until the city-states started forming. This was under the Minoans, which are kind of like a pre-Greek society. This is kind of cool. This is a reconstruction of one of the walls of the palace. This has been repainted, but it is a reconstruction of one of the paintings. We've got this bowl, got lots of red. Interestingly, when they reconstructed the palace, they actually put the columns upside down. So these are actually the bottoms of the columns. Alright, so let's talk about Greece. We're going to start with geography. So this is Greece right here, modern day Greece. Ancient Greece is going to more or less be that, sometimes a little bit bigger, sometimes a little bit smaller. But one of the first things you should notice is there's lots and lots of islands. There's lots and lots of islands. Second thing you should notice is that most of Greece is a peninsula right here. This peninsula. Third thing you should notice, it's a peninsula, so we are in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. This is the Mediterranean. Fourth thing you should notice, all this red. These are representing mountains. So we have a very mountainous place with lots of islands that depends on the ocean to survive. That's what we're talking about here when we talk about Greece. So because we are in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, sea travel is going to be very important. It's actually easier to get on a boat from Athens to Sparta and back than it is to walk, because you have to walk over all of these mountains. As I said before, 3/4 of Greece is actually covered by mountains. This is going to have a huge impact on civilization and societal development, because we're going to have lots of little villages pop up between the mountains, like in the valleys. There are a few roads, as I mentioned previously. Most people are going to travel by boat. That is kind of the highway of the ancient world. They're going to get on a boat and travel via the Mediterranean Sea. Only about 25% of Greece is arable land. Remember, that's a place where people can farm, which means they're going to depend a lot on fishing and especially on trade. And ultimately, this is going to lead to the creation of colonies. And we're going to talk about colonies a little bit later. So by 750 BCE, Greece is divided into city-states. And remember that a city is just a country that is a city and its surrounding land. And basically these cities popped up in the valleys, right? So if we have our original villages and towns, they pop up between the mountains. Those are eventually going to turn into city-states. Why doesn't Greece unify really quick like Persia and a lot of other places? Because you've got all these mountains and it's hard to control all of this territory at once. One of the interesting things about the Greek city-states is they're all very different. So if we just think about government for a minute, some of them are monarchies, some of them are aristocracies, some of them are oligarchies. We're going to have democracy in Athens. It's going to be the very first democracy. In 621 BCE, talking about Athens, we have the guy by the name of Draco. He is the first Athenian lawgiver, and he is going to develop a legal code. So if you want to think about Greece and their codified laws, one of the big ones is going to be Draco's Code. Draco's Code. This map is cool because it actually shows us in 650 BCE the breakdown of Greece and all the city-states. So we've got Athens, Sparta, Crete down here, and at this point Greece is also in Asia Minor or modern-day Turkey over on the side. So social hierarchy really depended on the city-state. Generally, men were at the top and slaves were at the bottom, but that's not the way it always worked. In Sparta especially, women had considerable freedom because they were expected to manage the country when the men were off at war. Athens, on the other hand, women had very little power and were simply educated to become mothers and run households. So they don't have nearly the amount of political power that women in, say, Sparta would have. Slave rights varied. In Sparta, slaves were slaves for life. In Athens, slaves could generally get their freedom. It just kind of depends. This social hierarchy over here is actually Athens' social hierarchy. but it's more or less correct for most of Greece. So at the top, we have the government. So in a monarchy, you realize that's going to be a king. In a democracy like Athens, this is going to be all of the male citizens. Under them, we're going to have the male children. Under the male children, we have women, foreigners, and female children. Under them, we're going to have slaves. So the social hierarchy isn't necessarily dependent upon job like it was in a lot of the other civilizations we talked about, where like maybe if you were a priest or a trader or a farmer, that would decide where you were. Very different in Greece. It's largely based on gender and citizenship. So were you born in Athens? Were your parents citizens? That kind of thing. So much like the other civilizations we learned about, Greeks were polytheists. So they believed in many gods and goddesses. The head god was Zeus. This is Zeus over here on the right. Each city-state had their own patron god or goddess, very similar to Mesopotamia. In Athens, the patron goddess is Athena, of course. And this is the temple to Athena at the Parthenon. Generally, the city's biggest temple would be to their god or goddess, and then another one to Zeus. So the English alphabet, in terms of writing, is actually based on the Phoenician alphabet, and the Greeks stole it from the Phoenicians. So, I mean, if you look over here on the right, we can see the English letters on the left, and then we can see the Greek letters on the right. Notice that they are very, very similar, for the most part. Some of them are different. It's used for a variety of things: government, education, entertainment. We've got the Iliad and the Odyssey here, which are books you've probably heard of and you probably either have already read or will read in school. Now we're going to talk specifically about Athens and Sparta, because Athens and Sparta are kind of polar opposites in terms of Greek city-states. So we're talking about Athens first. Athens is an open society. It is an open society. Learning is valued, art is valued, culture is valued. It's a very open society. It's a direct democracy. So all male citizens can vote. So if you're a male slave, you don't get to vote. If you're a woman citizen, you don't get to vote. But male citizens can vote. And they vote directly on the law. So it's not like in the United States where we vote on people who vote for laws. In Athens, you actually directly got to vote on laws. In 594 BCE, Solon, that's the second Athenian lawgiver after Draco, he's going to make some changes that outlaw debt slavery and slavery for citizens. So this is actually an improvement, again, because they're an open society. On the other hand, in terms of education, only the sons of the wealthy received formal education. That education was based on reading, poetry, history, math, music, logic, and public speaking. Very similar to the education you're receiving. Why are your 4 core classes English, math, science, and social studies? Because they were some of the Greek core thousands of years ago. Generally, as boys grew older, they were trained in warfare, but that was not their primary job. Their primary job was making money or, being part of the family business. Athens is very different. Sparta is very different. Sparta is a military state. Every male is trained to be a warrior. Food, farmers, are grown by helots. Helots are a community of Greeks enslaved by the Spartans, so they are slaves. All of the farming, all of the work is done by the slaves. Spartan men are warriors. That's all they do. Sparta's government is kind of weird. They actually have 2 kings in addition to a council of elders. And then they have an assembly of all Spartans that vote on law, so they've kind of got direct democracy going on. They've kind of got a monarchy going on. It's a little weird. From 600 to 371 BCE, Sparta had the most powerful army in Greece, but at a cost. All forms of individual expression were discouraged. Spartans did not value art, literature, culture, food. They only cared about war. Let's talk about the education of a young Spartan boy. As a young Spartan boy, you're going to leave home at 7, and you're going to move into an army barracks where you stay until you are 30. You're going to spend your days training to become a warrior. You're provided with very little clothing and not nearly enough food. The only thing they're going to feed you is blood broth, which is a soup made out of blood. It's very gross. And the reason they're giving you bad food and crappy clothes is because they're encouraging you to learn how to steal. The idea being that if when you go to war, if all the soldiers are good at going out and stealing stuff from the local population, then that means that the generals won't have to feed or clothe the soldiers. They can feed and clothe themselves. Unlike in other city-states, girls also received military training. The idea being, strong mothers make strong babies. Kind of makes sense. This is the key technology that we're going to learn about in regards to Greek civilization. That is the hoplite phalanx. So the hoplite phalanx is the meat grinder. It's the medieval tank. Basically, you've got lots of Greeks lined up in a block, very similar to this. They're armored in either iron or bronze armor. It just kind of depends on the period. They've got long spears, and all these guys are buddies. They all know each other, so they trust each other. So here's the way this works. They march forward. The enemies march at them. As soon as the enemies hit them, they completely annihilate them. This is the meat grinder. We're going to be talking a lot about the hoplite phalanx because it is the most powerful fighting force in the ancient world. So once again, why is this awesome? We've got long spears. We've got iron or bronze armor. All these guys know each other, so they all trust each other. They're willing to get in this formation and stay in this formation because they trust the people beside them. Let's talk about the Persian Wars very quickly. So the Persian Empire is over here on the right. Realize that this is Greece. They're a very wealthy region. They are ruled by their emperor Darius. Darius wants to conquer Greece because he wants to conquer the entire known world. So in 499 BCE, he does just that. He invades Greece. So the Greeks look around. They've been fighting each other for centuries, and they're like, oh my gosh, the Persians are coming, and we don't know what to do. We're lots of weak, independent city-states. They're a big, strong empire with thousands of soldiers. We should team up because we're actually kind of all similar. We have the same religion, the same language. We kind of sort of all have the same government. We should team up because we're all really Greeks at the end of the day and beat back these Persians. Ultimately, this happens because of the hoplite phalanx. The Persians are defeated at the Battle of Marathon right outside of Athens. This is a great map of the Persian invasion. We can see where they went all the way down the Greek peninsula and then back up on their way home. 10 years later, the Persians launch a second invasion. The second invasion is briefly stopped at the Battle of Thermopylae by the 300. Great movie if you've not seen it. Persian army continues its march south. It burns down the city of Athens, but is ultimately defeated at sea at the Battle of Salamis. So Greek ships are able to destroy the Persian navy, and without the navy, the Persians can't resupply their soldiers, and without resupply, soldiers starve to death, so they go home. The Persian army is finally defeated in 479 BCE, a second time at the Battle of Plataea, and a year later, the Delian League is formed. The Delian League is a Greek alliance headed by Athens with the sole purpose of stopping the Persians. The Persians come back, we've got this alliance, that way they can't beat us up again. This is a really great map of the Delian League. We've got the Persian Empire in green. The yellow and the orange are all of the city-states that are part of the Delian League, and then the red are Sparta and her allies. So the main problem with the Delian League is that Sparta refuses to join. And slowly, Athens begins to control more and more and more of the league. The league was actually originally headquartered in an island known as Delos. This is Delos. It gets moved to Athens. The city-states providing soldiers and ships. Eventually, they just start sending Athens money. What starts out as a league, what starts out as an alliance to oppose the Persians, quickly turns into the Athenian Empire. Take a few minutes, answer your 3 daily objectives.